This is Richard Wolff from Democracy at Work, responding to another Ask Prof. Wolff question from our Patreon community. This question comes from Espen Jensen, and it concerns the relationship between the growth of wealth, particularly in the last century or two, and capitalism. What is the relationship between these two? In order to answer this question, a little context will help. Capitalists, or more accurately, the apologists or defenders of capitalism, are very eager to argue, and have been for a long time, that capitalism is an engine of wealth creation. Most of them go even further and suggest that it is the greatest or the best or the most efficient creator of wealth in the human community, in human history. And then some go even further and imagine it's the best or the greatest creator of wealth that could ever be, and that we are in some sense at the end of history because we can't get further than we have gotten now. That kind of arrogance and self-confidence is a bit childish, especially when you remember that people in feudal Europe thought that that was the greatest system the world could ever have. People in the slave system of ancient Rome felt that way about their system, and on and on and on. It's fairly typical for people in a system who like and love and support that system to get, let's call it, exuberant about that system. So let me begin this way. Is capitalism credited with growing the wealth of the world that it has been the dominant system in for the last 300 years? I think the answer to that question is unambiguously yes. Capitalism is a system that develops wealth. It's not surprising that it does, since it's a system focused on doing exactly that. The competition among capitalist enterprises, the market, these are institutions that require you to grow wealth, to produce ever more. That has been the history of capitalism. It is a driven system, and it has therefore resulted in growing wealth. But that is in no way unique to capitalism. Wealth in Europe grew dramatically during the feudal period. Wealth in Europe grew dramatically earlier during the slave period, and I could go on, both in Europe and in other parts of the world. Various systems have been variously successful at growing wealth. And it is clear that for each system, depending on the specific circumstances, sometimes wealth grew quickly, sometimes wealth grew slowly. In capitalism, wealth sometimes grows quickly, and at other times it grows slowly. We even have words in capitalism when the growth is so slow, it becomes negative. That is, wealth is destroyed. From 1929 to 1941, the period called the Great Depression, the wealth output of the capitalist American economy shrank, as it did in Europe, as it did in many parts of the world. The crash of global capitalism over the last year, as I'm speaking to you, has meant a decline in the output, a using up of wealth, not an adding to it, over the last 12 months in almost every country on the earth, with the only meaningful exception being, ironically, the People's Republic of China, which rejects the label capitalist for the economic system that it has. So different systems at different times produce different outcomes. Espen Jensen's question goes a little further and wonders about the role of technology, the role of exploiting the global south. In other words, the question raises what else besides capitalist enterprise the drive of capitalists to make more profit, what else is accounting for the wealth that is produced? Well, there are a whole host of other contributors to wealth. It's never only the capitalist system or the feudal system or the slave system or the socialist system. It's also such things as raw materials, weather, air conditions, all kinds of circumstances in nature, all kinds of circumstances in history that will determine whether and how fast wealth is created. All of those factors play a role. Technical change does. The role of the government, very important. Espen Jensen's question turns a little bit to the role that government has played in making breakthroughs, particularly technical breakthroughs that are crucial to wealth creation. A wonderful example is the development by the American military in cooperation with certain universities to develop what we now call the computer, and all that has come from that, robotics, artificial intelligence, and so on. Yeah, governments can play an enormous role, either helping or hindering the growth of wealth within capitalism, much as governments helped and hindered in other societies. So the bottom line is, yes, like all systems, capitalism has contributed to wealth. That doesn't mean we can't contribute to wealth more effectively. A different system might grow wealth faster or slower. We might even prefer a different system that grew wealth less quickly because we were concerned about, for example, the environment, the ecological reality. Capitalism grew wealth very quickly, quite true, but it did so at an enormous expense of the environment, which we are only beginning to understand the dangers, the risks of. A different system might slow down wealth creation, but in the name of doing it with a more friendly relationship to the ecology, and that might be preferable. Here's another alternative. A different system, like socialism, might not grow wealth as quickly. It might, but even if it didn't, it might say we're going to grow it more slowly, but be much more concerned to distribute it less unequally. The mass of people might be quite sympathetic to a system that didn't grow so quickly, but distributed it very differently from the way modern capitalism distributes the wealth it has created. So yes, capitalism gets some credit for growing wealth, but that leaves open a whole host of questions that make it very complicated about whether one ought to believe that capitalism is a necessary or even a desirable economic system once you understand what the costs of wealth creation might be and what the alternative ways of organizing wealth creation might be. This is Richard Wolff for Democracy at Work.